Hey, 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 welcome back to Courtside Kayla. Your girl is in the building, and listen, today we are not doing the regular breakdown. We are not running scores. We are sitting all the way down and we are having a conversation. A real one. About one of the most fascinating coaches in professional sports right now. And before I get into it, y'all saw Game 82, right? You saw that? Because I need to start there. Boston Celtics, final game of the regular season, missing basically their entire starting five. 7 of their top 8 players sitting. The floor is full of G League guys, 10-day contract players. One dude literally signed with the team the day before. And they went out there and beat the Orlando Magic, a team that needed that win, a team that was fighting for playoff seeding. Orlando was healthy, motivated, desperate, and the Celtics still cooked them. And I'm sitting there watching this like, yo, who does that? What team does that? And the answer is simple. Joe Mazzulla's team does that, because that is who Joe Mazzulla is. So today we are going all the way in on this man. We are talking about where he came from, what makes him tick, his absolutely wild friendship with Pep Guardiola, what he pulled off this season without Jason Tatum, and why I genuinely believe Boston has their own version of the greatest coach alive. Let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, we gotta start at the beginning. Because if you don't know the origin story, you don't fully appreciate the miracle that is happening in Boston right now. Joe Mazzulla is from Johnston, Rhode Island. Little basketball kid, tough mentality, plays college ball at West Virginia under John Beilein. And his path was not easy, okay? He dealt with some personal stuff in college, made some mistakes, got suspended. And what saved him? Jerry West. Jerry West personally called this kid on the phone. One of the greatest to ever live picked up the phone and told this young man from Rhode Island, "Don't waste your talent. Grow up, get it together." And Mazulla has credited that phone call as one of the turning points of his entire life. That's a movie scene right there. He goes undrafted in 2011, can't find professional playing opportunities. So what does he do? He starts coaching. Not in the NBA, we're talking Glenville State, Fairmont State, the main Red Claws in the G League. This man was coaching in front of a few hundred people in gyms that smelled like old sneakers, and he was locked in, preparing himself, learning everything, building something in the silence. The Celtics bring him on as an assistant in 2019, and for 3 years he sits on that bench. Nobody's talking about Joe Mazzulla, no coaching hotboards, no ESPN segments. He's just in the back row, absorbing everything, waiting his moment like a sleeper agent. And then, September 2022, chaos. Ime Udoka gets suspended for the entire season because of a workplace situation that we do not need to get into. Training camp is days away, and Brad Stevens turns to the guy in the back row and says, "You're up." Joe Mazzulla is suddenly the head coach of the Boston Celtics with basically no time to prepare. And you know what this man did? 42-17. Best record in the NBA at the All-Star break. His first year. As an interim coach who nobody believed in. Charles Barkley would have said terrible about those expectations. And then he would have been wrong. Now here is where this story gets really good. And I need y'all to stay with me because this part is cinematic. Joe Mazzulla is a soccer head, like genuinely obsessed with the beautiful game. And during the NBA All-Star break in February 2024, right before the Celtics went on their championship run, this man gets on a plane, flies to England, goes to Manchester City's training ground, watches a full practice session, sits down with Pep Guardiola, the greatest football manager on the planet, for a one-on-one conversation. And they exchange Celtics and City jerseys like they were best friends at the end of a pickup game. Now, when this happened, people thought it was just a cool little trip, a fun photo op, nice little story. But it was so much deeper than that, because Mazulla explained why he sought Pep out, and when he said it, I stopped everything I was doing. He told the Men in Blazers podcast that he saw himself in Guardiola's career path. Think about it. Pep Guardiola was coaching Barcelona's B team, basically the reserve squad, when Barcelona decided to take a chance on him over established names. Joe Mazulla was sitting in the back row of a Celtics assistant coaching staff when Brad Stevens decided to give him the keys. Both of them came from nowhere. Both of them were overlooked. Both of them were given a storied franchise and told, "Here, don't mess this up." And both of them delivered immediately. Mazulla said he studied Guardiola's career as a roadmap. He wanted to understand the psychology of it. How do you handle instant success? How do you build an identity when everyone is watching you? How do you normalize greatness so your team doesn't get overwhelmed by the moment? He was asking real questions, coaching questions, human questions. And then, in June 2024, the night before Game 1 of the NBA Finals, Pep Guardiola shows up at TD Garden, in a Celtics shirt, sitting courtside, and they're photographed mid-court before tip-off in deep conversation. Just two coaches from completely different sports exchanging whatever they exchange when two obsessive geniuses get together. Mazulla said after the finals that Guardiola had been specifically helping him understand spacing, the movement of players in transition, how you position people to create and close gaps. He credited those conversations in a championship run, and Boston won that title. Now tell me that's not a Shaq and Chuck, "Did you see that?" moment. Because I could not make that up if I tried. And the reason I keep saying he is the Pep Guardiola of basketball, it's not just the origin story, it's not just the friendship, it's the philosophy. Because Pep Guardiola doesn't just win, he wins differently everywhere he goes. He won at Barcelona with Messi and tiki-taka possession football. He went to Bayern Munich and completely reinvented his style. He went to Manchester City and built another identity from scratch. 6 Premier League titles, 3 Champions Leagues. He is never the same coach twice, and he never stops evolving. That is Joe Mazulla. Before this season, Mazulla was known as a three-point absolutist. He literally said on camera that the three-point attempt rate was the most important stat in basketball. And it worked. With Tatum, Brown, Pritchard, White, Hauser, it was perfect. Championship-level perfect. But then this offseason happened. Tatum goes down with the Achilles. Porzingis is gone. Holiday is gone. The roster is completely restructured, and the entire basketball world goes, "Okay, this is a gap year. Pack it up. See you in 2027. And Mazulla looked at his new roster and said, "Cool. I'm changing everything." He evolved the offense to play more through the mid-range. He empowered Jaylen Brown to become a completely different offensive weapon. More isolation, more post-up, more creation. He retooled the substitution patterns so that every single player on the bench stayed ready because they never knew when their number was getting called. He was fluid, fearless, and completely unpredictable. The Boston Globe put it perfectly. The best coaches mold their system to their talent, not the other way around. And Mazulla did exactly that, while still maintaining the core principles that made Boston a championship team. Defense, toughness, culture, identity. Those never changed. Everything else? Flexible. Whatever it takes. But here's the part that I want to shout from the rooftops right now, because nobody is talking about it enough. The bench. What he has done with the bench unit and the depth of this roster this season is remarkable. Because Game 82 was not a fluke. It wasn't lightning in a bottle. It was years of culture work coming out in one glorious regular season finale. Baylor Shireman, career-high 30 points. Career-high. 7 rebounds, 7 assists. Drilling threes from everywhere like he was Steph Curry at Madison Square Garden. One of the reporters on the broadcast literally said it looked like Steph out there. Ron Harper Jr., career-high 27 points, 7 boards, 4 assists, 3 steals. Luka Garza, career-high 27 points and 12 rebounds, and then hits the miracle go-ahead 3 in the final 30 seconds while Boston was barely getting the ball in bounds. John Tawney, career-high 13 off the bench. Delano Banton, who just signed yesterday, blocking 4 shots. 4 career highs in one game by players who barely play against a team that needed the win. Now, if you were doing Inside the NBA right now, Shaq would have stood up out of his chair. Kenny would have been doing his little run around the desk. Charles would have been yelling about whoever doubted them. And Ernie would just be sitting there, smiling like he knew all along. Because this is not normal. This is what a culture built from the ground up looks like when it goes full bloom. Celtic Hall of Famer Robert Parrish said it this week, and this quote is everything. He said, "It appears that Mazulla subscribes to this philosophy. Don't give me a reason not to play you." And those guys seem to stay ready, 1 through 13. Everybody comes in and contributes, and there is no drop-off when the bench comes into the game. 1 through 13. No drop-off. Parrish said that. One of the greatest Celtics who ever lived looked at this current team and said that. That's not hype. That is a generational basketball mind giving a stamp of approval. And how does he build that readiness? That's what I want to get into now. Because the mental side of Mazulla's coaching is where he really separates himself from basically everyone in the league. He calls his approach controlled madness. He doesn't just tell his players to be mentally tough, he builds it into practice. He simulates pressure situations. He creates drills that replicate the tension of late-game moments, so that when you're in a real game and it's tied with 30 seconds left and the crowd is going crazy, your brain doesn't freak out. Your brain goes, "Oh, we've done this. This is Tuesday." Peyton Pritchard explained it perfectly. Mazulla has trust in his players that most nights they are going to bring it at a high level. But he also has a great feel for when to challenge and when to give grace. He's not a screamer. He's not a chair thrower. He is something rarer and more dangerous. He is a coach who understands each individual human being on his roster and knows exactly what each person needs to perform. He invites players to his mixed martial arts workouts. Most decline. But the message is clear. This man doesn't just talk about toughness. He lives it. And when it came out after the 2024 championship that he coached the final 3 months of that entire playoff run on a torn meniscus, people, and never said a word to anyone about it until the banner was secured, that's when I fully understood what we're dealing with. He didn't want his team worrying about him. He didn't want to be a distraction. He just walked through the pain and led them to a title. That is the most controlled madness thing I have ever heard in my life. And I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Now let's talk about the Tatum return, because it is one of the best subplots of this entire season, and it deserves its own moment. Jason Tatum tore his Achilles. 9+ months of rehab. The Achilles is basketball's most feared injury. It has derailed careers, stolen explosiveness, changed players permanently. And through all of it, Mazulla managed the situation with a patience and a wisdom that I think gets overlooked. He didn't force the narrative. He didn't publicly pressure Tatum to come back. He built a team so strong around Jaylen Brown that when Tatum eventually returned, he was walking into a winning culture, not a desperate one crying out for a savior. That is a huge psychological difference for a player coming back from a serious injury. You don't want to feel like everything depends on you when you're still finding your legs. Mazulla protected him from that pressure. And then, early March, the news breaks. Tatum might be coming back. And Friday night against Dallas, the announcement drops in the afternoon. Tatum returns tonight. TD Garden erupts. He promised his return would be in a home game. He kept that promise. And since he's been back, Boston has been nearly unbeatable when both Jays are healthy and on the floor together. The Celtics are 13 or 14-2 when Tatum and Brown play together this season. That's not just talent. That is a system that was ready for him to slot back in. And I cannot close out without talking about Brad Stevens, because the coaching greatness doesn't happen without the front office greatness. Brad Stevens was one of the best coaches this franchise ever had. When he moved to the front office, people wondered whether he could translate that same elite instinct to roster building. And this offseason, this past summer, he had to make some of the hardest calls of his career. The Celtics were dangerously close to the NBA's second apron luxury tax line for the third consecutive year. Under the new CBA, that triggers brutal punishments, restricted trades, weakened draft position, all of it. Stevens knew he had to act. So he moved Porzingis, he moved Holiday. He took apart a championship team piece by piece and still put Joe Mazulla in a position to compete. He brought in Nikola Vucevic at the trade deadline for front-court depth without disrupting what Mazulla was building. And then, at the very end of the season, April, he signed Delano Banton, stashed him in Maine for a while with the G League affiliate, then brought him back up right when the playoff roster needed to be finalized. The Boston Globe called it a masterclass. A real line from the coverage said the CBA was literally designed to break up teams like the Boston Celtics, and Brad Stevens figured out how to cut costs and still win. That is a partnership. That is two guys who genuinely trust each other operating at the highest possible level. Stevens builds the roster, gives Mazulla the tools, and then gets out of the way and lets him coach. And Mazulla takes whatever tools he's given and extracts the maximum possible value from every single one of them. That is how you build a dynasty. That is the blueprint. All right, I want to land this plane with the big picture argument. Because I've given you the stats, the stories, the roster moves, the Pep Guardiola friendship, but here's the bottom line. What makes Guardiola the greatest is not just the trophies. It's that he wins differently each time. Different players, different clubs, different styles. And he finds a way every single time. He never gets comfortable. He never stays the same. He challenges himself as much as he challenges his players. Joe Mazulla, at 37 years old, already holds the highest winning percentage of any head coach in NBA history, with over 200 games coached. He has a championship ring. He has 56 wins this season without his franchise player for most of it. He has G League guys delivering career nights in crucial regular season games. He has Jaylen Brown playing the best basketball of his entire life. He has a bench that is ready to go 1 through 13 on any given night. And he did all of that while changing his entire offensive identity to fit the talent available, while managing a star player's Achilles recovery, while navigating a stripped-down roster on a budget, while staying mentally and philosophically connected to the best coach in the world in a completely different sport. If that is not the Pep Guardiola of basketball, I genuinely do not know what more you need to see. All right, Courtside Kayla family, that is the Joe Mazulla deep dive. We went all the way in today, and I hope you felt every single minute of it, because this man deserves the flowers, right now. Not after the playoffs, not when he wins another ring, right now, for what he did this regular season. If you rocked with this episode, please smash that thumbs up button. These longer breakdowns take real work, and every like pushes this content to more people who need to see it. Subscribe if you're not already part of the family. Drop a comment. Do you think Mazulla is the Pep Guardiola of basketball? I want the debate in the comment section right now. Until next time, this is Courtside Kayla. Stay locked in, stay courtside, and as always, peace and buckets.